I'm going to try to be brief because I want to minister tonight. I want to do the calling of salvation. But today, if you're writing notes, today's teaching is the call of God. The calling of God. How many of you guys know that you've been called by the Lord? Raise your hand. Okay, couple. All right. How many of you? Okay, we'll just leave it like that. I want to tell you guys that all of us, every human being on earth, was birthed out to hear a call. And we will either hear a call of God or a call of the enemy, which is Satan, the devil, who came here to do what? What did the devil came here to do? Kill, steal, and destroy. He didn't come here to be buddies with you. He came here to destroy the very creation that God made, which is you and I. We were made in the image and likeness of God. That means that we look like God. Our facial, our emotions, our being, He created us in the image and likeness of Him. But because of sin, it corrupted us. Because of sin, it did a lot of things, and Satan is behind every action of evil. But God has called you and I. And I want to go to the book of Exodus, chapter 3. And we're going to read here the story of Moses. How many of you guys have heard of the story of Moses? Raise your hand. Just a couple. All right. So, how many of you, okay, so I guess I have to give a little bit of background. So Moses, okay. How many of you guys know the country of Egypt? Egypt, okay. So Egypt, back in the day, was an empire. And they were very strong and powerful. They had slaves. And the slaves were Jews and other types of cultures that they conquered. And at this time, the Jews were growing in population, and the pharaohs of the time were afraid of an uproar and of a takeover coup that would happen if the Jews were to rise up and take over Egypt, right? So there are millions of Jews. There's like 3 Jews for every Egyptian. So Pharaoh, to try to control population, cruelly, he would send out in order to kill every firstborn that was a Jew. Pretty intense. Unfortunately, it was a custom. So during that time, Moses was birthed, and he was a child, he was a baby, and God told the mother of Moses, hey, make a basket and send him off in the river through the Nile River. And through the Nile River, Moses was received by an actual princess of Pharaoh, and she received Moses and called him Moses, which means from the water I have found you. So this is a Jew that was then raised by Pharaoh. He was a prince. Things happened. Moses, he saw like the cruelty that was happening to his people, the Jewish people. He saw how bad conditions they were in, and he actually fought against them, fought against Pharaoh's army, the actual guards, and he ended up killing one of them. So because of fear, he then left Egypt into the desert for 40 years. And here we are. God, after 40 years, Moses, he's like probably 80 years old. And here it says, now Moses was keeping the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the back of the wilderness and came to the mountain of God onto Horeb. Next verse, please. And the angel of Jehovah appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. So in the desert, it's very common to see bushes on fire because it's so hot. Okay, so this is a very normal phenomenon. But here, so he notices a bush is on fire, and he looked, and he behold that the bush burnt with fire, and the bush was not consumed. So Moses is like, hey, what's up with this bush? It's not being consumed. It's not withering the bush. It's still burning for a long time. And so that brought his attention. Because, like I said, in the desert, bushes burn every time because it's so hot. In this case, it brought his attention. Next verse, please. And Moses said, I will turn aside now and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. Verse 4. And when Jehovah saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. God called Moses. So if you notice, Moses was busy attending flock. Moses was married. He was working for his father-in-law. And God called him when he was busy. That tells us that God is going to, sometimes, he will call us when we're busy. He will call us when we're in the middle of work, in the middle of the grind, we're in the middle of the project, in the middle of the stress, in the middle of a huge situation. God is going to call your attention. And he's going to call on to you. And he's going to say, hey, I have plans for your life. If you keep reading here, you can read it at home. God tells him what to do. God tells Moses, hey, I'm calling you to go back to Egypt and take out my people. The millions of Jews that are there. With no army, just a staff and trust in me. That's pretty insane. Going against the most powerful empire of its time to take out all the slaves that they depend on for gross revenue and lifestyle. Imagine that. Like, that is insane. Like, would you do that? I don't know. I wouldn't. That would be kind of intense. But if having this type of experience where Moses, if you keep reading, Moses has an encounter with God. God transforms his life. And he puts his identity, God's identity, in Moses. Because let me tell you something. Moses, he wasn't like a scholar. He wasn't like a crazy leader where like, wow, he has so much charisma. He wasn't someone that went to school or fought battles and he was a natural born leader. Moses was just a shepherd attending a flock, left the prince style of life. And not only that, he had an actual speech impediment. He stuttered. So imagine that. God is calling a man that was basically kicked out of Egypt. He is working a basic job of attending flock. It's like saying, like, I don't know, whatever basic job you consider basic job. And he stuttered. God called him. And not only that, Moses led through his stutter with the help of his brother Aaron to help him interpret what he was trying to say. So imagine that. Having a brother here, you're stuttering and you're like making, and your brother has to interpret for you so that people can understand what you're trying to say. Like, that's like, God, are you sure you picked Moses to lead the people of Israel, to lead the Jews free from slavery? And he was old too. He was 80 years old. Imagine that. How old are we? How more prepared are we? And yet we say, God, are you sure you want to pick me? If God chooses you, because It is not you. God qualifies you. He doesn't look for the qualified. He qualifies the called. Moses wasn't qualified, but he qualified him because he wanted to. God. We all have a calling to answer. All God needs is your heart. In this moment here, if we keep reading in verse 5, 6, and 7, if you keep going, I would love for you to read this at home. But what happens after is that God tells Moses, hey, this is now holy ground. He basically had a taste of heaven in that very moment. God converted that situation there, the burning bush and where he was around, into a taste of heaven where the presence of God transformed his heart. He took away all the fear, all the insecurities. He took away everything in that very moment because he allowed God to just fill his heart. And he said yes. A lot of us, God has called us. Those that have been here for a while, God has called you. Will you respond to the call? And those who have been here for less than a year, God is preparing you. For some of you, God already has been calling you. Are you willing to stop what you're doing and do the will of the Lord? Of a more greater purpose, but you are the key. Imagine if Moses did not say yes to God. I don't know what God would have done. Maybe he would have chosen, I don't know. I really don't know. God knows how to twist the right bolt, because he did it with Jonas, right? But if Moses wouldn't have responded to the call, then those Jews that were slaves would have never been free. There's a call for your life and the destiny of souls, of people that are getting ready to be impacted when you say yes to Jesus. If I did not respond to the call, you would have not been here. Sitting right here today. Hundreds of young people would have not known Jesus if I would have not responded to the call. And I didn't know I was going to impact hundreds of people. I want to say, so far about 500 young people have came to the Lord through my call. Through my wife, probably 1,000. And I'm not trying to boast. I'm just trying to see how serious this is. Imagine 500 souls that would have not been saved. 1,000 souls that would have not been saved. Like, this is a pretty serious call. Like, I don't want that blood in my hands. For some of us, we're only destined to save one for the Lord, or to impact one. Or maybe you don't even interact with it, but because of the transformation that happened in your life, that caused someone to be like, I want what that person has. Who is that God that he's following? What changed his life? Was just a lifestyle, and where God transforms you, and you're not shy. You post it on Instagram. You share with one person, and the person shares it with another person. Your testimony of the transformation in your life touches someone's heart. When we respond to the call. How do we respond to the call? If we go to Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8. Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8. And it says, and I heard the voice of the Lord saying, who shall I send? And who go for us? Then I said, here I am, send me. God is saying tonight, there is hundreds of thousands of people that are in prison, that are in slavery, just like the people of Israel that were in Egypt enslaved, taking away their freedom. Hundreds of thousands of people in California that are in prison mentally, enslaved emotionally, and they're waiting for the Savior to come and set them free. They tried drugs, they've tried relationships, they've tried therapy, they've tried, not to say therapy is bad, it's good in any way. They've tried a whole bunch of things, programs, whatever it is, but they cannot be filled completely. They feel a void, they feel lost, they feel trapped with terror. Some cannot sleep, some cannot feel peace in their hearts. And you and I are destined to reach them intentionally or unintentionally by your yes to God. It's crazy. It is insane. The call that God has bestowed in our lives, in your life, in my life. I continue to respond to the call of God. I could just say, God, I'm done. I got 500 souls already that I preached to. They accepted Jesus. I'm good. No, the call continues. God says there's another mission. The call is still on. And I feel that, not a burden, that responsibility. It's not fair that I got to be saved and others have not yet had the opportunity to be saved by Jesus. Living a life that is selfless. It's like I need to continue responding to the call of God. And my question to you is, if God, for those who are new, if God calls you, will you respond like Isaiah did? Here I am, send me. It is easy to be comfortable. It's easy. But when God encounters your life, and you give your heart to God, He puts His desires in you. None of this is forced. I'm not here because someone told me to, because someone is forcing me. I'm not here because I'm getting paid. I'm volunteering because I love God, and I love you guys, and I love those who are going to come. God places that desire in your heart, but all that God needs is your yes. He'll take care of the rest. He'll take care of to make sure you're filled, you're equipped, He won't let you fall down and fail. If you keep saying yes to Jesus, He will make sure you will fulfill that calling until your last breath. Moses, being 80 years old, stuttered. He was kicked out of Egypt. He was insecure. God called him. All he needed was, yes, Lord. I don't know how you're going to do it, but I'll say yes. Boom. He was the most iconic man in the Bible of the Old Testament. He was so iconic that God needed to bury him versus the people. Why? Because the people would have idolized him. That's how iconic he was. So that all the glory always belongs to the Lord. So tonight, I'm going to do a calling for those that are willing to respond to the call of God. Some of you already know that God has been calling you and you've been shying away. and this message convicted you. Some of you don't know that there's a call, but there is a call, and you're like, all right, I'm ready. Like, whatever, God, you want me to do, I'm down. Like, let's do this. And you're waiting for the call. And God could be preparing you. Moses was prepared for 40 years in the desert. I don't think God's going to be preparing you for 40 years before he calls you. Maybe it's 4 months, 40 days, 40 minutes. I don't know. But God is preparing you. You're here for a call, a purpose. Our ministry is focused on making sure that you fulfill purpose. Not only do we have you here at church to receive, but for a greater purpose than just being here. But purpose that is godly. And I felt to share this message because I feel like so for some of us we're in that cusp, we're in that stage where some of us have been already filled, transformed, renewed, and God is saying, hey, I'm calling you, you're not listening. I'm calling you and you're shying away, you're afraid. And the Lord is reminding us of Moses, the most disqualified person from a human perspective, but the most qualified because he said yes. God doesn't look for the qualified. He calls you to be qualified. He transforms you. So tonight, I want to make a call, an altar call, for you to respond to the call of God. You know that God has called you. Some of you now know that God has a call for you. And I'm going to make two invitations. One, for those that want to respond to the call of God. And then the other one is going to be, I'm going to do an actual call for the lost. For you to be able to have an opportunity to accept Jesus in your heart. And to make him Lord and Savior. So, why don't we do this tonight? Why don't we all stand and let's close our eyes tonight. And